Reports are emerging that Russell Crowe has finally opened up about what really happened between Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban. After staying quiet for nearly 20 years, sources suggest he's now sharing details that the public never knew. And what he's revealing could change everything you thought you knew about their marriage. Let's go back to where it all started. January 2005. The entertainment world was gathered at a major Los Angeles charity gala. Nicole Kidman was there, still recovering emotionally from her highly publicized split from Tom Cruise just a few years earlier. According to insiders, Russell Crowe was also present that night, watching as his longtime friend Nicole spotted someone across the crowded ballroom. That someone was Keith Urban. Back then, Keith wasn't the massive star he would later become. He was an Australian country singer with growing success, but nowhere near Nicole's level of fame. Sources close to the situation claim that Russell noticed something important that evening. He saw the way Nicole looked at Keith. It wasn't just casual interest. It was something deeper, something that seemed to pull her attention completely. Nicole herself has admitted in past interviews that she felt an instant attraction. But here's the surprising part. Keith didn't approach her that night. He didn't ask for her number. He simply walked past. And for the next 4 months, there was complete silence between them. No phone calls, no messages, nothing. Imagine being one of the most famous actresses in the world and wondering why someone hasn't called you back. Reports suggest Nicole spent those months questioning whether Keith had any interest in her at all. But according to those familiar with the situation, Russell Crowe sensed something else was happening. He knew Nicole was searching for stability after the chaos of her previous marriage. She wanted something real, something that felt like home. Then, 4 months later, Keith finally reached out. He invited Nicole on a motorcycle ride through the countryside in New York. They rode to a quiet picnic spot in Woodstock. The wind, the scenery, but sources indicate Russell Crowe was watching this whirlwind romance unfold with concern. Everything was moving incredibly fast. Nicole was rushing into something new, fueled by her desire for a fresh start and Keith's undeniable charm. Would you trust your instincts after just one perfect date, or would you wait for more signs? By June 2006, the wedding was set. It took place at a historic chapel in Sydney, Australia. Over 200 guests attended, including major celebrities like Hugh Jackman and Russell Crowe himself. The media coverage was massive. Nicole wore a stunning designer gown. Everything looked perfect from the outside. From the very beginning, Nicole and Keith created romantic traditions. They started writing letters to each other every single night they were apart. They promised never to go more than a few days without seeing each other. To the world, it seemed like the ultimate love story. A Hollywood superstar and a rising country music artist building a beautiful life together. But according to reports, Russell Crowe saw things differently. He was there at that wedding, celebrating with everyone else, but he noticed small details that didn't add up. Sources suggest he saw hesitation in Nicole's eyes when she looked toward the future. He sensed underlying tension beneath all the celebration and romance. The truth analysts now believe is that Keith hadn't fully dealt with his personal struggles yet. Nicole was diving into this marriage with everything she had, almost as if she was trying to escape the pain of her past. The wedding preparations had been intense. They were managing 2 families and global attention while barely knowing each other for more than a year. Reports indicate Russell Crowe watched his friend, someone he had protected for 2 decades, jump into deep waters with someone who was still largely unknown to those closest to her. The fairy tale had officially begun that June afternoon. The photographs showed them laughing, looking completely in love. They became Australia's golden couple. But sources close to Russell suggest he was already keeping track of warning signs that were being overlooked. He saw the loyalty he would need to maintain over the next 20 years. As this seemingly perfect match began its long and complicated journey toward the headlines we're seeing today, everything appeared settled to the outside world. The vows had been exchanged. The world was convinced they had found forever. You'd think the hardest part was behind them after saying, "I do." But the reality, according to insiders, is that the real challenges were just weeks away. October 2006. Think about where most couples are 4 months after their wedding. Usually, that's still the honeymoon phase. They're looking at wedding photos and settling into married life. But for Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban, sources indicate the fairy tale didn't just hit a bump in the road. It crashed completely. Reports suggest Keith relapsed into substance abuse. Atalo. This wasn't a quiet, private struggle. It was a major, life-changing crisis that forced Nicole to make a decision that would shape the next 19 years of their relationship. Here's what most people don't remember about that moment. Nicole was at the peak of her career. She had a major film project lined up, but when the crisis hit, sources say she didn't hesitate. She reportedly canceled appearances, stepped away from the film, and relocated her entire life to Nashville. She traded Hollywood for a rehab facility waiting room in Tennessee because she realized that without immediate action, she might lose the man she just married. This is where Russell Crowe's perspective becomes particularly revealing. According to reports, he was watching all of this happen in real time. Russell has always been someone who sees situations clearly before others do. He later described their survival of this period as nothing short of miraculous. But sources suggest he also noticed something else. Something quieter. He saw the beginning of a major imbalance in the relationship. Nicole was pouring all of her energy and career momentum into Keith's recovery. She was the one setting boundaries and providing support. Keith later admitted publicly that he felt like he had destroyed their fresh start. He called it hitting rock bottom. Imagine being just 4 months into a marriage and having to admit you've already broken its foundation. That's incredibly heavy. But to keep things together, they relied on those nightly letters I mentioned earlier. Even while Keith was in treatment, they were writing to each other. Those letters weren't just romantic gestures. According to insiders, they were survival tools. They were the only thing keeping their connection alive while the outside world waited for the marriage to fall apart. Think about this for a moment. Would you put your entire career on hold for a new spouse struggling with addiction? It's a massive sacrifice to make when you've barely started your life together. Reports suggest that because Nicole made that sacrifice, the relationship did survive. Hardied. They went on to have 2 daughters together in 2008 and 2010. To the public, it looked like the ultimate victory of love over addiction. The media presented it as a beautiful story of devotion saving a life. And in many ways, it was beautiful. But sources close to Russell Crowe indicate he saw the hidden cost. He saw that Nicole was becoming the permanent problem solver in the relationship. She had proven she would drop everything, while Keith had proven he could be the source of chaos. And here's what's particularly interesting. While they were building their life in Nashville, the dynamic was shifting. Nicole's career eventually picked back up. But analysts believe the weight of that early crisis in 2006 never truly disappeared. It set a pattern of one-sided support that Russell Crowe noticed from the very beginning. Sources suggest he saw Nicole's incredible strength under pressure, but he also sensed she was carrying a heavier burden than Keith. It's like when you're building something together, and one partner is always the one fixing problems, while the other keeps creating them. It works for a while, but it builds a certain exhaustion that eventually shows up. They had their miracle survival story, and for a solid decade, it looked like they had beaten the odds. They were the couple that proved Hollywood marriages don't have to end in disaster. But even with the children, the Nashville home, and the nightly letters, sources indicate the distance was starting to creep in. It wasn't addiction this time. It was the pure exhaustion of maintaining a fairy tale that had such a difficult beginning. Reports suggest Russell Crowe kept quiet for years out of respect for Nicole, but he was tracking the ignored warning signs and the way career pressures were pulling them in opposite directions. He saw that the spark he witnessed in 2005 was being tested by the reality of 2 people living very different lives. They had been forged stronger by the crisis of 2006, perhaps. But what came next would test them in ways they never expected. By 2010, the world believed the difficult times were over. They had survived the crisis, had 2 daughters, and owned a beautiful home in Nashville. But here's what most people miss about long-term relationships. Sometimes it isn't the explosions that end a marriage, it's the silence. And for Nicole and Keith, sources suggest that silence was fueled by schedules that literally didn't allow for a shared life. Keith Urban is known for being constantly on tour. That's part of his identity as a performer. But when you look at the numbers, it's actually shocking. Reports indicate he spent over 200 days per year on the road. That's more than half the year where he wasn't in their Nashville home. He was in hotels, dressing rooms, and on stages around the world. While the public saw a rock star living his dream, sources suggest Russell Crowe was looking at the empty chair at Nicole's table. He saw the gaps being created in their daily life. And more importantly, he saw how those gaps were starting to be filled in other ways. Here's where things get particularly uncomfortable. As the years went on, insiders suggest the communication started to change. It wasn't just that they were apart physically. It was that when they were together, the phone became like a third person in the room. There was reportedly a new level of secrecy, a pattern of giving unclear answers to simple questions about who was calling or where certain time was being spent. Sources indicate Russell noticed this first. He saw Nicole's energy change. She went from being the stable foundation. Keith leaned on to being someone who was constantly on alert. Nicole reportedly started making surprise visits to Keith's tour stops. On the surface, the media presented it as the world's most romantic wife supporting her husband. But according to insiders, if you look closer, these weren't just romantic gestures. They were check-ins. She was showing up to see the reality of his life on the road, because the stories she was getting over the phone reportedly weren't matching up anymore. It's an exhausting way to live, especially when you're also managing a massive career of your own. And speaking of her career, that created its own set of challenges. Between 2017 and 2019, Nicole was deeply involved in a major television project called Big Little Lies. If you've seen the show, you know how emotionally intense her performance was. Keith actually admitted later that it was difficult for him to watch. He saw his wife in incredibly vulnerable and sometimes violent fictional situations, and it created psychological distance between them. Reports suggest he'd be coming off the high of performing for stadium crowds, and she'd be coming off the emotional exhaustion of demanding scenes. They were operating on completely different wavelengths. How many lonely nights do you think it takes before a marriage finally breaks? Everyone has a different breaking point when it comes to feeling emotionally unavailable to your partner. Sources indicate the resentment really started to build during the Nashville versus Hollywood tension. The support dynamic that had been so unbalanced in his favor during the 2006 recovery period had never really leveled out. Nicole had made the big sacrifice early on, but as the years passed, analysts believe she started to realize that the support wasn't being returned in the way she needed. And then we hit 2024. Keith announces another massive summer tour. For most fans, it was just another chance to see him perform. But for the marriage, sources suggest it was a breaking point. The physical distance was now a permanent feature of their lives. Russell Crowe, who reportedly had been Nicole's trusted confidant for over 20 years, started hearing a different tone in their regular conversations. He wasn't just hearing about busy schedules anymore. According to insiders, he was hearing about a woman who felt like she was married to someone who was never really there. By the time they made their last public appearance together at an event in Nashville in the summer of 2025, sources suggest the cracks were barely hidden. If you look at photographs from that day, the smiles don't quite reach their eyes. They looked like two people performing the role of a couple for the last time. It was a technical performance, a final courtesy to the public before legal processes started moving. Reports indicate the signs were everywhere. The nightly letters had stopped. The surprise visits had turned into tense phone conversations. The distance had done its work, slowly breaking down the foundation, until there was nothing left except the public image. But as much as the distance hurt, it wasn't the final blow. Things were about to go from quiet erosion to complete collapse. Because it turns out the unclear answers and phone secrecy weren't just about tour stress. Sources suggest they were about something much more specific. And Russell Crowe was reportedly the one who finally had to help Nicole process what was happening. It's 2018, and Nicole is right in the middle of filming those emotionally demanding scenes for Big Little Lies. She's already drained from the intensity of her work. Then, in the quiet of their home, sources suggest she discovers something on Keith's phone that doesn't belong there. Reports indicate it wasn't just one inappropriate message. It was a digital trail. We're talking about communications with someone connected to his work that went far beyond professional, complete with logistical details, expenses, and explanations that fell apart the moment Nicole examined them. Here's where it gets intense. Quote, instead of a typical Hollywood argument, sources suggest they had a 4-hour confrontation that started at sunrise. Think about that for a moment. 4 hours of stripping away the fairy tale to see what was really happening. Nicole reportedly laid out the evidence, the messages, the timeline, the proof. She didn't just want an apology. According to insiders, she wanted complete honesty. Russell Crowe was reportedly the one she contacted right after. He had seen warning signs, but this was the first time there was undeniable proof. Now, here's the part that sources suggest Russell has finally opened up about. He actually stepped in and warned Keith directly. He told him he was playing with fire and was going to lose the best thing that ever happened to him. He wasn't just being a friend to Nicole. He was trying to save Keith from his own patterns. But the warning reportedly fell on deaf ears. Keith promised transparency. They went into intensive counseling, and for a brief period there was an illusion of renewal. But if you had proof in your hands, the messages, the lies, the broken trust, would you forgive or just walk away? According to Russell's perspective as reported by sources, that forgiveness only allowed the cycle to continue. By the time we reached 2024, the perfect image was being held together by sheer willpower. At a major awards ceremony in April 2024, the world saw Keith Urban emotional as he talked about Nicole saving his life. People thought it was the most romantic thing they'd ever witnessed. But sources suggest that to Russell Crowe, watching from the sidelines, those tears looked like something else. Why? They looked like the guilt of someone who knew the foundation was already gone. And here's what's particularly revealing. While cameras were flashing at that awards event, the reality behind the scenes was reportedly much colder. The 2018 betrayal hadn't stayed in the past. According to insiders, the patterns had returned, and the transparency they had worked so hard on had turned back into phone secrecy and unclear answers. Sources suggest Russell saw his friend being drained by the effort of maintaining an image for someone who couldn't stay consistent. Sure, the 4-hour conversation in 2018 had bought them a few more years, but it hadn't changed the fundamental reality of their relationship. Trust is like a shattered mirror. You can try to put it back together, but the cracks will always show when light hits it. And the light was about to get very, very bright. The final breaking point was coming, and it would lead to an ending that was swifter and more calculated than anyone expected. Because once Nicole decided she was done, sources suggest she didn't just leave. She closed the chapter completely. January 6th, 2026. That's the date it all became official. While most of the world was just getting back into the rhythm of a new year, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were putting final signatures on a 19-year chapter. It's remarkable how quickly something that looked like a fortress for 2 decades can dissolve when reality finally catches up to the image. But here's the thing. The legal documents didn't just end the marriage. They exposed details that Russell Crowe had reportedly been observing from the sidelines for years. It really started to crumble in the summer of 2025. If you were paying attention, sources suggest they were living completely separate lives. There were no joint vacations, no casual sightings together in Nashville. Then on September 30th, the filing happened. It was swift, professional, and remarkably quiet for a couple of their status. But when the settlement details finally emerged on January 6, 2026, that's when the real story came out. The numbers, as they say, don't lie. Let's look at the custody arrangement because it's absolutely striking. Nicole walked away with 306 days of custody. Keith got 59. That's exactly 17% of the year. Now think about that for a moment. In the world of high-profile celebrity divorces, you rarely see a split that unbalanced unless there's a very specific reason for it. This isn't co-parenting in the traditional sense. Reports suggest it's a visitation schedule that feels much more like limited access. And here's another detail. There's no ongoing financial support. The settlement was reportedly handled with a one-time payment. They basically cut the financial connection entirely. No monthly payments. No reason to keep shared accounting records between them. Was a total clean break. To anyone examining the details, Sources suggest it indicates Nicole wanted to close the door and lock it rather than deal with years of shared financial obligations. Now, as you can imagine, the media started creating narratives almost immediately. They tried to portray Nicole as cold or calculating for the way she handled the settlement, but reports indicate Russell Crowe wasn't having any of it. He stepped up to counter that narrative, pointing out that Nicole wasn't being cold. According to sources, she was being a mother who had been doing most of the work for years. To Russell, the 17% custody arrangement wasn't an act of cruelty from Nicole. It was just a reflection of the reality they'd been living while Keith was on the road or caught up in his own world. Does that custody arrangement seem like guilt to you? Or is it just the reality of their different lifestyles? Because 17% is a number you can't ignore when you're talking about a 19-year marriage. The prenuptial agreement they signed all those years ago reportedly held up perfectly. After nearly 2 decades, there was no long, drawn-out battle over assets. This tells you that Nicole had protected herself from the start. Perhaps it's because deep down she knew the stability she hoped for back in 2005 wasn't guaranteed. She'd been through a high-profile divorce before, and sources suggest she wasn't about to let this one leave her vulnerable. They walked away with their respective lives, but the silence between them now is reportedly heavier than it ever was during the marriage. Russell's loyalty to Nicole remained strong through the entire process, even as he watched the public fairy tale he helped celebrate in Sydney all those years ago turn into cold, hard statistics. But here's where the story takes its final turn. Russell's decision to be the one to finally share these details and defend Nicole's reputation reportedly came with a cost that even he didn't fully see coming. Because when you break the silence on a Hollywood story this big, the consequences don't just hit the couple. They hit everyone standing nearby. It's now 2026, and while the legal matters have settled, the emotional consequences are actually just starting to peak. Russell Crowe didn't just walk away once the papers were signed. Sources suggest he stepped up in a way that's causing significant ripples in his own personal life. We're talking about daily phone calls, shared conversations, and constant check-ins with Nicole. Reports indicate he has become her anchor as she navigates this new reality. But here's where it gets complicated. Russell's long-term partner, Brittany Theriot, is reportedly not pleased about the sheer intensity of this bond. Think about that for a second. When your partner is spending hours on the phone with one of the most famous women in the world, even if it's entirely platonic, it creates tension. Sources suggest Russell is literally risking the stability of his own relationship to ensure Nicole doesn't collapse under the weight of this split. He's always been her protector, but now he's doing it at a significant personal cost. It's that traditional loyalty where you don't abandon a friend, even if your own home is starting to feel the strain. Now here's what's being said about Keith. He's reportedly sitting in Nashville right now, and the word is he's dealing with some serious regrets. He's looking at that 17% custody arrangement and realizing that the silence he maintained didn't actually protect his reputation. According to insiders, it just confirmed what Russell has been hinting at for years. Keith's silence is loud, and it sounds like someone who finally realizes he let something extraordinary slip through his fingers because he couldn't control his patterns. Is supporting a friend through divorce worth risking your own relationship for? Throughout all of this, Nicole's grace has reportedly been the one constant. She isn't out there attacking Keith in tabloids. According to sources, she's simply letting the settlement details and her 20-year friendship with Russell do the talking. It's a masterclass in how to handle a public collapse. Russell has reportedly confirmed over and over that there's nothing romantic happening here. It's just two people who have been in the entertainment industry trenches since the 1990s and refuse to let the other fall. But truth-telling is never free. Russell's willingness to expose the cracks in this fairy tale has reportedly made him some enemies in Nashville and parts of Hollywood. He's the one who saw the 2005 spark, the 2018 betrayal, and the 2024 overcompensation. By standing as Nicole's witness, sources suggest he's the one making sure the world sees her as someone who survived rather than someone who was defeated. The fairy tale might be officially over, but the legacy of this kind of loyalty, that's the part that actually endures. From those 2018 secret messages to that shocking 17% custody split, the real story is finally emerging. Russell Crowe reportedly risked his own peace to protect a 20-year friendship. What was the biggest revelation for you? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video.